So the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it has been in the works for quite some time, and the motivations behind it has been numerous. AJ Numa, in an interview with Game Informer, stated that one of the reasons we wanted to create a continuation was because I wanted to revisit that Hyrule again and use that world again, while incorporating new gameplay and new story, which is quite similar to the approach they had with Super Mario Galaxy 2. To IGN, AJ Numa also confirmed that the new Breath of the Wild, or the sequel to it, is not necessarily going to be related to Majora's Mask or inspired by it. What we have showed you currently is a little darker than Majora's Mask. As we all know, Majora's Mask is one of the darkest Zelda games, if not the darkest Zelda game in the franchise. So we are in for a very dark and grim experience. Hello everyone, and welcome to this inside take on the next Zelda game, that will say the sequel of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, or Breath of the Wild 2. And when we think about Breath of the Wild, it is a game that is all about remembering the past, remembering the deceased, but also moving on. 100 years have passed since the tragedy that resulted to the downfall of the Kingdom of Hyrule, the death of the selected champions, and the King of Hyrule. And all of them took spirit forms 100 years later. All of them were determined to take down Calamity Ganon once and for all. Most of all, Zelda, who was fighting 100 years in the sanctum of Hyrule Castle, doing her best to prevent Ganondorf from resurrecting. And this battle was successful. The resurrection of Link from the Shrine of Resurrection resulted in Link once again pulling the Master Sword and succeeding in bringing down the beast once and for all. It also resulted in the passing of the spirits of the King of Hyrule and the 4 champions. All of them had one mission, and that was to destroy Calamity Ganon. And at the end of the game in Breath of the Wild, Calamity Ganon is destroyed, and it's time to move on. The only thing that is in the way is that the power of spirits, which is emitting from throughout the game, because the kind of energy that is seen every time a Sheikah monk dissipates is visible in the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel first trailer. That will say that we'll be playing around with the power of the dead, or the power of the undead, the mummified forms of the Sheikah monks who were able to preserve themselves for 10,000 years. So could this body of Ganondorf be 10,000 years old, or maybe even older? There's a high probability of it, because let's remember that even though Ganon has been a staple of the Zelda series in nearly every timeline, the human form of Ganondorf has only showed up in 4 games. That will say Ocarina of Time, where his first attempt at claiming the Triforce, then the Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and finally his next form in Four Swords Adventures. And this Ganondorf does have many resemblances to the Ganondorfs of the past, that being the long red hair, his crooked nose, his head jewel, which are typical of the Gerudo tribe. But Ganondorf's body is under a seal, because, well, Zelda was holding Calamity Ganon from breaking the seal, which seems to have Gerudo letters, as pointed out by Zeltik in his analysis, and these letters are no coincidence, because they are also supporting Link, specifically when the seal on Ganondorf breaks. So why would a Gerudo support Link in this case? Very simple. The Gerudo hate Ganondorf. They hate Ganon. The Gerudo in the era of the Wild, but also in previous generations dating 10,000 years back, have been fighting and been determined to destroy, or at least keep a seal on their former leader. So in this case, it is very likely that the spirits of the old Gerudo, that also including Lady Urbosa, who, well, her spirit passed on after the ending of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, will now support Link with their power. Just like Urbosa did in a very large extent through Urbosa's Fury, which, look at the color, is exactly the same type of green that we saw in the Breath of the Wild sequel trailer. Another thing pointed out by Zeltik in his analysis is the overpresence of luminous stones, which makes sense since we find them in the depths of Hyrule Castle, a place where Hyrule will probably store its fallen heroes, knights, soldiers, former champions, and so on, all just to keep Ganondorf away, using the power of the dead to keep him away. So it looks like the theme of using the power of souls will play a very heavy role in this game. And where the theme of the living was very important in Breath of the Wild, it seems that the theme of the dead or undead will play a much bigger role in order to bring down this mummified but now awoken Ganondorf, and supported by one group, namely the Yiga clan, which up to this point was governed by a complete moron, Master Koga, but have become much dangerous ever since. And imagine the power of the Yiga clan commanded by, say, a resurrected Ganondorf. They will pose a much bigger threat to the surviving civilizations of Hyrule. So it looks like a bigger conflict is brewing up. The question is, will it take place in Hyrule, or will it take place somewhere else? It seems that we might be going both on the ground and underground in this game, and that seems to be also a theme of it. Because as one thing that Zeltik also pointed out in his analysis is the presence of the Zonai, an ancient Sheikah civilization, which is prevalent throughout this trailer and also in the keeping of Ganondorf. Because the only thing left of Ganondorf after the destruction of Calamity Ganon and the Dark Beast Ganon is his mummified form. And the destruction of this one might point to the end of Demise's curse, which also could be seen through Ganondorf through his posture. Obviously, this is not Demise. Demise was destroyed at the ending of the Era of the Sky in Skyward Sword. But his hatred has lived on and will live on, most likely, in Ganondorf in the Breath of the Wild sequel. Other than that, it's like the power of the dead will be much more prevalent and important in the sequel of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And that's where we pretty much leave the trailer. A clear indication of a darker Zelda game. A Zelda game that is going to be on the level of, say, Majora's Mask. Only that we might not be moving away from Hyrule at all. Instead, we'll be exploring its much darker, but at the same time, important depths. We will find out more about the power of the souls and how this power can be used on top of the Master Sword to destroy and once again bring down Ganondorf, just as it was done in The Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. The Master Sword has still some purpose in the game, and we'll find out as soon as the game comes out sometime, maybe in 2020 as the 20th Zelda game, which it could be, or for the franchise's 35th anniversary, which kind of also makes sense because, as it was pointed out on Twitter by Zant, the theme backwards is kind of the game over music from the original Legend of Zelda. And what was the purpose in the sequel of The Legend of Zelda? That will say the adventure of Link, the resurrection of Ganon. And whenever Link dies in that game means one thing: the return of Ganon. We all know that big changes are coming. Zelda didn't cut her hair without a reason. Most likely, it marks a big change in her life. After all, hair in Japan is a very sacred thing. Females were supposed to wear long, pure hair. Cutting hair in Japanese culture, especially among female characters, is such a drastic move. It marks a departure from something because it marks a big change in the life of the person that is cutting a part of itself away. So perhaps Zelda will be more than just an NPC in this game, perhaps a playable character, maybe even the main lead in parts of the game. The haircut might mean more than we think. Speculation is fun, but we need more confirmation. And it's obvious that the Zelda team will be putting a lot of effort, a lot of time to make this game a sequel worthy of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, that will address some of the shortcomings of the first game, that will say the lack of a proper prevalent story, and, more specifically, dungeons. Because even though we see wall paintings, those are of Ganondorf, and perhaps his misdeeds. Misdeeds that might explain even how we ended up in this situation, perhaps even how the timelines eventually converged and became one at the end of the Zelda timeline. There's so much to go over, and we will do that throughout this new series, Inside Breath of the Wild 2 sequel. So make sure to like, subscribe, press that shiny notification bell to not miss any of the episode in this brand new series, as we will go deeper and deeper and also look for clues. As always, a big thanks goes to all our gracious patrons, and in particular our royal producers Kenyatta Ali and Bradley Carriage. You can join them too on patreon.com/commonrealm, where we will talk much more about the Breath of the Wild sequel, that will be Breath of the Wild 2, or whatever the name will be, and also regarding when we'll see it in between the episodes of Inside Breath of the Wild 2 sequel. That's all for now, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you in the next video.